Hey everyone, Jeff here from the RevitKid.com. Tonight I'm recording a video to sort of respond to an interesting set of email conversations I've been having with you guys, with readers of the blog, the RevitKid.com. So I sent out an email this morning, I think it was, and it was pretty simple. It was, if you haven't learned Dynamo yet, why? What are the reasons you haven't learned Dynamo yet? And I also made a couple assumptions ahead of time, and my two assumptions were that the two main reasons that folks who haven't learned Dynamo yet have not learned Dynamo yet are one, they don't have any time, or they feel like they don't have enough time, and two, they don't know where to begin. And so what I found out in reading your responses, I've got, as I'm looking at it now, I've got over 100 people that replied directly to that email. So thanks for those of you, and I hope we continue to have these conversations. But what I found out was that first, those 2 points that I assumed were pretty common, especially not knowing where to begin. And so in this video, I'm not going to talk about that exactly. What I want to talk about is one point that came up from quite a few of you that I wasn't expecting, which was you're not really sure what Dynamo is. And so I made an assumption, and we all know what happens when you assume. And so I assumed that everyone heard of Dynamo, which I think was a fair assumption, because at this point in time you've probably heard of Dynamo. If you're using Revit or some related software, you've probably heard of Dynamo. But I also assumed that that also meant you knew what it was, and so that was a bad assumption on my part. And so what I want to do today in this video is just sort of talk a little bit about what I think Dynamo is, sort of define what Dynamo is to me, to hopefully give you an understanding of what it is. Before I jump in, I also asked in sort of response to these emails and in sort of prepping for this video, I also asked on Twitter, so at the Revit Kid on Twitter if you want to follow me. I also asked Twitterverse what they define Dynamo as. So I said, how would you, let's see, what did I say? I said, an informal Twitter poll, how would you answer the question, what is Dynamo? And so I got a couple interesting answers. Some cool ones are, it's a GUI for Revit's API, and it's also a donut shop in San Francisco, which I did not know it was a donut shop in San Francisco. So thanks for that, Mark. That's kind of cool. But there's a couple people that talked about visual programming, and so that's kind of where my definition of Dynamo goes. So what is Dynamo? Let's start. So Dynamo is a visual programming tool. And so before I talk about how it relates to Revit and what you do on a daily basis, for example, I just kind of want to define what that means, because a lot of people just say that, and I think some people might not have any idea what I'm talking about when I say visual programming, graphical programming, you name it, however you want to call it, or whatever you want to call it. And so regardless of whether it's connected to Revit standing alone on its own or connected to another piece of Autodesk software, for example, no matter what, Dynamo itself is a visual programming tool. So what does that mean? I'm going to be the first to admit I am not a coder. I have dabbled in some code basically as in a need-to-know basis. So I've obviously dabbled in some HTML and CSS for the website, and that was more of just me tinkering and messing around. I also tried my hand in a little bit of Revit add-in stuff many years ago before Dynamo existed. And then a few other little books that I bought on like C#, and honestly, I hate it. I like the concept of coding and the ability to control and do what you want with a computer and have that control over it, but all the different languages, figuring out different languages and how they relate and the references and all that stuff, just honestly I'm not a big fan, and I'm sure there's a lot of you out there who feel the same. You may be an architect, you may be an engineer, a designer, and you're saying to yourself, I don't want to learn C#. I don't want to be a computer science person. So what visual programming gives you the ability to do is utilize the power of coding without actually learning how to code. And so yes, as you dive into Dynamo, you will see that there are some benefits to folks that are making custom packages and different things where maybe you end up learning Python. But I gotta be honest with you, I've been using Dynamo for, I don't know, 4 years now, and I have yet to write a single snip of custom code myself. So when we talk about visual programming, what visual programming is doing is taking something, a task, something you would do in Revit. So for example, clicking an element. Okay, that when you click an element, there's a line of code that happens, or there's a line of code that can control that. So instead of using a line of this crazy code, like you see here, what Dynamo does is bundles it up into this nice little thing called a node. And what's nice about this is instead of thinking about the actual language, the coding, the syntax, all the stuff you need to understand with actual programming on a computer, what you're able to do is just think about the process you take and then connect the dots to really visualize your process. So that's another piece that came up when I was thinking about how do I define Dynamo. And what it is it's a visual programming tool that allows you to visualize your process. So for us architects who are very visual people, it makes it a lot simpler. Instead of thinking about all these different lines of codes, if you just say, hey, I want to select all of the windows in my project, you know that you can go to a node that's called select all windows. I'm not saying that that node exists. It could. But what I'm saying is that that's sort of the idea. So instead of learning the code, now you're just thinking about the actual process, and you're utilizing all these different pieces of how you would actually process a function, for example, in Revit, and you're able to connect them and do different things. So that's what visual programming is to me. Dynamo itself, it is a standalone product. Technically, it has a sandbox that you can connect to multiple software. In the case of this video, in my context, we're talking about Revit, because obviously I'm focused on Revit and you're just utilizing it with Revit. So now we know Dynamo is a visual programming tool. Now I mentioned it's connected to Revit. So in our example, and anything that I'm going to be talking about here, we're going to be connected to Revit. So really it's just a tool that sort of sits next to Revit. It's always connected to Revit, and you're able to visualize and perform functions within Revit. And so what you'll see if you dive into any of my courses on Dynamo or any of my videos is I always talk about Dynamo does it the way you do it. So it's a really simple way to think about how Dynamo works. Yes, there are some things that you can do beyond what you can do with a mouse and keyboard, but the reality is when you're learning the software, if you think about the steps you take with a mouse and a keyboard to get something done, odds are that's going to be your visual program to make that task happen. So now that we know a little bit more about what Dynamo is, I hope that was helpful. If it wasn't, comment below, shoot me an email, let me know if you want me to dive in a little further. But the reality is that's what it is. Okay? It is a tool that sits on top of Revit that allows you to program without actually programming. And I promise you, it is mostly plain English, and that's what I like the best about it, or that's what I like the most about it. It's not some crazy language where if you wanted to move an element, it's called something completely different. Odds are the node is going to have the word move in it somewhere, and you're going to be able to figure it out. So that's what I like the most about Dynamo. So now that we know a little bit about what it is, the next sort of step is what can you do with it? And so that was kind of where the conversation was going in some of the emails that I had today with folks, is that they don't know what it is, they don't know what to do with it, they don't have the time to learn it, and they don't know where to begin. And so I'm not going to solve all those in this video, but just as some examples of taking this concept of a visual programming tool and how it applies to your everyday life, for example. So as a visual programming tool that sits on top of Revit, that allows you to code things into Revit without actually using code, Dynamo can do a whole bunch of things, right? And the reality is the cop-out answer is that it can do anything. I'm not going to say that today because you want to know some things that it can do, but it can't do anything. But when we focus on it as a visual programming tool, and for you to understand what it is and what it does, automation is probably the easiest way to understand the concept of what Dynamo does. Okay, so I want you to think of a task right now that you do all the time. Maybe you did it yesterday, maybe you do it all the time during the week, maybe you're going to do it this week. Something that you're doing within Revit that you repeat over and over and over and over and over again with a mouse and a keyboard. Okay, so the first one that always comes to mind in my mind is duplicating views as dependents and then linking them to a scope box. And so this applies to usually projects that are a little bigger in size, but anything that has part plans, or I mean, to be honest, even if you have like toilet blow-ups, something like that. But when you think about it, you're right-clicking your view, you're duplicating as a dependent, you're renaming that new view, you're assigning a scope box to it. Then you're doing it again, and then you're doing it again, and then you're doing it again. You're doing it over and over and over again until you've got all your part plans set up. Okay? So the example of duplicating views, I think, is a great way to demonstrate how visual programming works. So when you think about what you're doing when you're duplicating a view, I just went through it. You right-click the view, you rename the view, you assign a scope box, you do it again, you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. So when you think about how that works in Dynamo, how that works in a visual programming environment, is you just think about the process and the steps you take. Okay? So what are you doing? You're selecting your view, you're duplicating as a dependent, you're renaming your view, and then you're assigning a scope box to it. And so when you think about those steps, those chunks, that's what the Dynamo script is going to be. So it is a visual depiction of your process, regardless of programming, coding, or anything. Okay? So I hope this was helpful for those of you that maybe did not know what Dynamo was. I hope this gave you a little bit of an understanding. Please subscribe and like this video below if you enjoyed it, and also look out for my next enrollment of DIY Dynamo, which is actually on Monday, Monday December 2nd, which is coming up, is my winter 2019 enrollment, which is the fully online version of DIY Dynamo. So you can sit at home in your PJs and you can learn Dynamo. So check that out in the link below. It's DIYDynamo.com. Again, please subscribe to this channel if you like the video. Comment below if you have any thoughts on Dynamo, and I hope to talk to you guys soon.